Hello, everybody. Today I'm going to talk about multi-winner voting rules. So about voting rules in general, what are voting rules? We have voters, we have candidates, which are options that we need to choose from. Candidates are not necessarily people, they can be also different plans or stuff like that. In a voting rule, we have inputs that are called ballots. And typically, these inputs are either rankings about the candidates, grades about the candidates, or approvals about the candidates. When I say approvals, it simply means that for every candidate, I say, okay, I like this candidate, or I dislike this candidate. And the output can be one candidate. In that case, it's called the single winner voting rule. It can be several candidates. In that case, it's a multi-winner voting rules. And when there are several candidates in the output, it can be either a committee of fixed size, which is what I will talk about in this talk, or it can be also a committee of variable size, which is not fixed in advance by the rule, but that will depend on the input. And I will not talk about this possibility. And the third possibility about voting rules is to provide a ranking about the candidates, which will be an aggregate ranking based on the opinions of the voters. And in that case, it's called the social welfare function. About multi-winner voting rules, we have old problems that already occur in a single winner voting rules, namely the Condorcet paradox, the Arrow theorem, and the Gibbard-Satterthwaite theorem about manipulability. I will not talk much about these problems because they already exist for single winner voting rules, and they also exist for multi-winner voting rules. But in the case of multi-winner voting rules, we also have new problems. The first one is, what objective do we pursue? And we will see that according to the situation in which we use the multi-winner voting rules, it can be a bit different about what we want about the winning set of candidates. And the second problem, which is much more pregnant in multi-winner voting rules than in single winner voting rules, is the computational complexity of computing the winners. So before going deeper into the subject, I will start with a preliminary example to illustrate the question of the objective that we pursue. So imagine that we have the following candidates: A1, A2, A3, A4, B1, B2, C1, and D1, sorry. And we have 100 voters. We have 73 of them who approve of A1, A2, A3, and A4 and disapprove of the other candidates. 24 voters that approve of B1 and B2, and so on. So now imagine a situation when we want to use a multi-winner voting rules to elect K equal to 4 candidates. So who do you think should win this election? And I will ask to Fabien and Gérard not to answer because they have already seen this talk. Do you have an opinion about who should be the winners? Everybody is sleeping already.
We need to think about it.
I mean, the question is not clear, no?
Sorry?
Yes, that's the question is not very clear, right? So according to what criterion? So you have to define principles,
sure.
Right?
The question is not very clear. So you're a bit cheating because you're guessing what I'm going to say afterwards. But let's go. So first, imagine a situation.
Just for me, what seems natural is the A1, A2, A3, A4, but maybe there are other criteria.
In some situations, that's probably what you want to do. But could you imagine other winning committees that would be suitable in other situations? But probably the A1, A2, A3, and 4 will be useful in some situations.
Maybe we want to have B1 or B2 replacing one of the A. I don't know.
So yes, another option is to have a bit of everything, is so that everybody is represented. So to have, for example, A1, B1, C1, and D1. But that's giving a lot of weight to the few voters that like C1 and D1.
This is why I say only B1 or B2.
Yeah, so another option is to take into account the relative size of the group of voters, and to say, for example, that you want 3 candidates of type A and 1 candidate of type B typically. So,
but if the one criteria could have been, but then there will be A1, B1, C1, and D1, is to maximize the number of at least one approval for each voter.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so now we have everything that I want to talk about. The first possible objective is called in the literature excellence. So imagine, for example, that you want to recruit 4 taxi drivers. So basically the choice are independent, and you don't have a notion of representativity or proportionality. And you have 100 jurors that have said who are the good taxi drivers. And in that case, it's quite natural to take A1, A2, A3, and A4. The second possible criterion is proportionality. So you want the voters basically to be represented proportionally to the size of the groups of the voter. So imagine that you want to elect a parliament of 4 members. It's quite reasonable to take A1, A2, A3, and B1. So 3 candidates of type A and 1 candidate of type B, because there's approximately 3/4 of A voters and 1/4 of B voter. And the third possible criterion is diversity. For example, imagine that we want to choose location for defibrillators. So you don't care if there are 3 or 4 defibrillators near where you live or where you work. You simply want one for the day where you will have a heart problem. So in that case, it would be quite natural to take one location A, one location B, one location C, and one location D. And in that case, you can save the life of everybody in case of a heart attack. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to present a zoology of multi-winner voting rules. Then I will come back to discussion about computational complexity, and also this question of the objectives that we pursue, and then I will conclude. So to start with the zoology of rules, I will start by talking about best K rules. So I will take a running example throughout this section. So we will use voting rules with rankings, but also voting rules with approval values. So I give both for each group of voters. For example, this group of voters have 27 voters. They prefer candidates A to B, B to C, C to D, D to E, and they approve of A, B, C, and D, but not E, and so on. And in this running example, I will assume that you want to elect a committee of size 2. So the best K rules, their principle is very simple. You take your favorite single winner voting rule, typically a voting rule that produces scores or a ranking over the candidates in general, and you simply output the K candidates with the best scores. So this is the case, for example, in single non-transferable voting, which is another way of saying K-best plurality. So in plurality, each voters give 1 point to his or her preferred candidates. And here, so A has a score of 27, B a score of 0, C a score of 12 plus 5, which makes 17, and so on. So here the candidate with the best plurality score is A, the best one is E, sorry, and the second one is A. So the winning committee will be simply A and E. You can also do the same with K approval. So K approval means that you consider the K favorite candidates of each voter. So unlike the name suggests, it's not a voting rule based on approval ballots. It's a voting rule based on rankings, because you will simply select the K first candidates of each ranking. So here, for example, these 27 voters give 1 point to their favorite candidate and 1 point to their second favorite candidate. So that, for example, candidate A has a score of 48 with 27 here and the 21 that are here. So the two best scores are for A and B. So the elected committee would be A and B. We can do also the same with border voting. So in border, classical single winner border voting, the number of points that you give to a candidate is the number of candidates that you put below this candidate. For example, here this voter give 4 points to A because there are 1, 2, 3, and 4 candidates below A in the ranking. And these voters give a score of 0 to A because there is no candidate below A in the ranking. So this way you can compute the score of A, for example, which will be 189, and you simply take the two best border scores, which are 40 and 40. Similarly, you can do the same for approval voting. So each voter gives 1 point to every candidate that she approves of. So for example, here A would have 27 points plus 5 plus 21, and that's all, 53. Here the winners would be B and C. So let's go on to the next category of multi-winner voting rules, the committee scoring rules. So here the recipe is to find a way to make each voter assign a score to each possible committee. So before, each voter gave a score to each candidate, but now you need to find a way to give a score to each set of candidates. And you will simply output the committee with the best score. So I lied a bit, because you don't need to find a way to give a score to each set of candidates, but only to each set of candidates of size K, because you're only interested in committees of size K. In fact, all the best K rules that we have seen before belong to this family. Because in that case, you have the score that a voter gives to a set of candidates was simply the sum of the scores that this voter gave to each candidate. I'll give an example now. For example, we have seen in the previous section best K border, and we were computing the score, the border score of each candidate, and output the best committee. So the winning committee, if you remember, was B and C. And we had that the score of this committee was the individual score of B plus the individual score of C, which was 432. But we can compute this score another way, voter by voter, instead by candidate by candidate. So, for example, here, this voter, for the committee B and C, they give 5 points because there are 3 candidates below B and 2 candidates below C. That makes 5. And when you multiply this 5 by the number of voters, you have 135. And if you sum all this, you will, of course, find the same amount, which is 432. But here we have computed this score voter by voter, instead of computing it candidate by candidate. But we have also other forms of committee scoring rules that are not best K rules as in the first section. For example, we have proportional approval voting. So the principle here is to say that when you have one of your approved candidates in the winning committees, your happiness is increased by 1. But when you have a second candidate in the winning committee that you approve of, then your welfare is only increased by 1/2. So you're very happy when your first approved candidate comes into the committee, but you're a bit less happy when there is a second candidate that you approve of in the committee, and so on. You follow a harmonic sequence. And we will see a bit later why it is clever to choose a harmonic sequence. In that case, the winning committee would be C and D. Believe me, I've done the computation. And for the example, we can just compute the score of this committee to illustrate the way the score are computed. So, for example, these 27 voters, they approve of A, B, C, and D. So their level of happiness, in some sense, in 1.5, because they're happy once for the first candidate and half once for the second candidate. Here, these guys approve only of C, and so their level of happiness is 1, and so on and so on. So the score of the committee C and D is 114, and it can be shown, in fact, that no other committee has a better score in that example. Then we have Borda-Chamberlain-Courant rule, which is also known as simply Chamberlain-Courant, because in the original proposition of Chamberlain-Courant, it was using the Borda scores, but you can do Chamberlain-Courant with other forms of score. So here the principle is that the score, your level of happiness with a given committee is your level of happiness with the candidate that you like the most in that committee. So if you use Borda score as a measure of happiness, your happiness for a committee is the Borda score of the candidate that you like the most in the committee. In that example, the winning committee would be AC, and once again, I will ask you to believe me. And for the example, we can compute the score of this committee. So, for example, these guys, they have their most liked candidate who is in the committee, which is A. So their level of happiness is the Borda score of A, which is for 1, 2, 3, 4 guys below A in their ranking. Similarly, the level of happiness of this guy is 4 because they are maximally happy. And the level of happiness of these guys is only 3 because in the committee, the candidate that they like most is C, and C has only 3 candidates below in their ranking. So finally, you can check that the score of the committee AC is 300 and similarly, we can apply exactly the same idea to approval voting. And in that case, we will say that the score that a voter assigns to a given set of candidates is the approval score that he assigns to the best candidates in the committee. But that simply amounts to saying that if you like somebody in the committee, your level of happiness is 1. If you don't like anybody in the committee, your level of happiness is 0. So here, the winning committee would be C and E. Once again, we can compute the score of this committee to understand how the scoring works. So these guys have candidate C in the committee, so they are happy. Their level of happiness is 1. These guys have C and E, so there are also somebody they like in the committee. Their level of happiness is also 1, even if they approve, in fact, of 2 guys in the committee, and so on. So in that case, we are lucky because we can have a committee that satisfies everybody. We have a level of happiness of 100 in the end. So generally speaking, about the committee scoring rules, we have a very large family of rules. that can be created with the following ingredients. So the first need that you need is a way for a voter to assign a score to a candidate. So typically you can take the plurality score, you can take the K approval score, you can take the Borda score, or you can take the approval score. Then from this way to assign a score to a candidate, you will make a way to assign the score to a set of candidates. And then again, you have several options. The first option is simply to do the sum of the score that you assign to each candidate. So that is what you do in the best case rules. The second option is to say, okay, I will make a weighted sum of the scores that I assign to the candidates. But this weighted sum is a bit special because the weight will depend on the rank in your preferences. That is called an order weighted average. For example, if you remember proportional approval voting, we assign a weight of 1 to the candidates that you prefer, then a weight of 1/2 to the second one that you prefer, then a weight of 1/3 to the third one that you prefer, and so on. And a third option would be to use the maximum of the scores that you have for the different candidates, and that's the idea behind Chamberlain Courant. In fact, these three cases are particular cases of the second one, which is called, as I said, order weighted average, because in an order weighted average here, if you put 1 everywhere for the weights, then you have the sum. If you put 1 for the first weight and 0 for all the others, you have the max. And in fact, the order weighted average are very useful in voting theory because it's an easy way to generalize the sum, the average, weighted average, maximum, and also minimum. For example, if you take all zeros and a 1 in the end, you will have the minimum also. And finally, once each voter is able to give a score to each set of candidates, you need to have a way to aggregate the scores given by the voters. So in all the cases that we have seen, we say that the score of candidates, the score of a set of candidates, sorry, is simply the sum of the score that each voter assigns to this set of candidates, but we could do otherwise. It's not very used, but we could do otherwise. The product or the mean, for example. So here's a little sum up table of what we have done. So here it's the way that a voter assigns a score to a single candidate. So plurality, K approval, Borda or approval. Many other examples could be possible, but we have seen only these ones. And here is the way that these scores for individual candidates are aggregated into a score for a set of candidates. So with the sum, with a non-trivial order weighted average, or with the maximum. And here you have the voting rules that you obtain. So single non-transferable voting, block voting, best case Borda, best case approval, proportional approval voting, Borda Chamberlain Courant, and approval Chamberlain Courant. Finally, we have also other rules that don't fit into the category of committee voting rules. We have first the iterated single winner rules. So the principle is the following. You elect one candidate by your favorite single winner voting rules. Okay, so choose the one you like. And then you remove these candidates from the ballots and you iterate the process to have other winning candidates. So if I do that with a plurality, for example, these guys vote for A, these guys vote for C, and so on and so on. So the candidates with most votes is E with 34 ballots. So E is going to be elected. and we remove candidate E from all the ballots. Then I guess that candidate A has 48 votes, and I think that's the maximum. So candidate A will be elected. Another rule is a single transferable vote. So this rule is very important because it's indeed used in real political election, for example, in Australia. So when you want to elect K candidates, you will fix a quota that is the number of voters divided by K plus 1. So, for example, if you want to elect one candidate, the quota will be 50 voters, which means that you need to have strictly more than 50 votes to be elected, which is logical if you want to elect only one candidate. If you want to elect two candidates, the quota would be 1/3 of the voters, which ensures that only two candidates can have this quota and no more, and so on. So what you will do in single transferable vote is that you will elect all the candidates who have more than the quota of top votes, and then you will remove this quantity of happy voters. And the second step is that if no candidates has the quota, then you will eliminate the candidates who have the least votes. So we will see that on an example. So here we have 27 votes for A, 17 for C, 22 for D, and 34 for E. So since we want to elect a set of two candidates, the quota is 1/3 of the voters. So candidate E has 34 voters, so it's enough to be elected right now. So E is elected, and since we have 33.3 voters who are happy, we are going to remove 33.3 voters who voted for E, because these guys, they are already happy, they already got their chance to be heard. So among these E voters, we will remove 33.3 voters, and we do it proportionally to the different types of voters. So in the end, remain the 0.41 voters ABDC and 0.25 voters BCAD. So now I can try to elect a second candidate, but no candidate has the quota. So the candidate with least votes, I guess it's B. So B is going to be eliminated. I think I was drunk when I did this example. Yes, I think I was drunk. So B should be elected, and then C should be elected. Sorry, there's a mistake in the example. B should be elected. It should be eliminated. So eliminated too. And after the elimination of B and C, D now has 12 plus 5 plus 22 votes. So D now reaches the quota, and D is going to be elected too. So the final committee is D and E. Then to continue with this zoology, we have the Condorcet rules. So the principle behind the Condorcet rules is to say that imagine that you have a set of candidates S of size K, such that any candidate in this set beats any candidates out of this set. And when I say beats, I mean that it's preferred by a majority of voters. So to see that, you need to compute the majority matrix in your profile of ballots. So for example, I did that for our usual example. We have 53 voters who prefer candidate A to candidate B. We have 48 voters who prefer candidate A to candidate C, and so on. So here, candidate A is preferred by a majority to B and to D, but not to C and to E, and so on. In the case of my example, we are not lucky. There does not exist a set of size S that meets the Condorcet property because, for example, A is preferred to B, B is preferred to C, C is preferred to D, D is preferred to E, and E is preferred to A. So there's a Condorcet cycle that contains all the candidates. So in this example, the winning committee of two candidates will depend, in fact, on the variant of a Condorcet rule that you will choose to use. And I will not go into that in this talk. Finally, I will just mention a rule that is called Monroe rule, which is a variant of Chamberlain-Courant that ensures that not too many voters are represented by the same candidate, and I will not give the details about this rule. So I guess I have, yes, a bit of time for the discussion. First, I will say words on the computational complexity of these rules, and then I will go back to the question of the objective that you pursue, and that we have talked about this in the beginning of the talk. So about computational complexity. So problems of computational complexity of computing the winner already exist in single winner voting rules, but they are quite rare and limited to very unusual single winner voting rules. But unfortunately, for multi-winner voting rules, it's a very frequent problem. In particular, proportional approval voting, Monroe and Chamberlain-Courant are not computable in polynomial time in general, unless p is equal to np and so on. Basically, the problem is that for each of these rules, you don't really know how to do better than computing the score of the set of candidates for each set of candidates, and to see what the set of candidates has the best score. So you have a combinatorial problem. So to circumvent the problem, all these rules have a sequential variant, and the idea is simply to start from a set of candidates, of winning candidates, that is equal to the empty set, and to add the winning candidates one by one greedily, according to which candidates improve the score by the maximal amount. So it's the classical algorithm that you use as an approximation for the, I missed the word. Help me. Not linear, but the same thing for sets.
Submodular.
Submodular. Thank you for that.
Submodular.
Submodular, yeah. So it's the classical approximation algorithm for submodular problems, in fact, to add the elements one by one instead of optimizing over all the existing sets. Other existing approaches to limit the problem of computational complexity is to study the fixed parameter tractability of these kind of questions. Typically, in fact, these voting rules are difficult to compute when the number of when the size of the committee is large. But if you want to use them for a committee of 2 candidates or 3 candidates, of course, most of the time it will be easy to compute.
François?
Yes.
About the complexity that you discussed. So, of course, I don't know whether there is it is reasonable, for example, to use a suboptimal algorithm when you do voting. I mean, that's a question, a philosophical question, because if you use a suboptimal algorithm, then you would have a percentage, let's say, of cases that will not find the global optimum, meaning that you know, somehow there will be a lack of reliability to the voting results. So imagine, for example, that you say I used an algorithm that found a suboptimal solution. I don't think that many people would accept such a result.
Yeah.
You know, the submodular case is 1 minus 1 over e.
Yeah, I totally understand your point. In fact, generally, when you do that, what you do is you don't say, okay, we will use proportional approval voting, for example, and as an implementation, we will use the sequential variant. That's not what you say. Otherwise, people will get mad and furious.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly.
In fact, what you will do in real life is to say, okay, we will the voting rules that we are going to use is sequential PAV. And that's it. So
okay, so you define a new, let's say, voting rule in this way.
Yeah, exactly. And okay, maybe your reason for using sequential PAV is to say, oh, okay, PAV has a notion of welfare that I think is good for our problem, so it's reasonable to use a sequential PAV. So of course you have in some sense PAV in mind when using sequential PAV, but of course you say we are using sequential PAV, and that's it.
Okay, I see. So a similar question, short question, is that I guess the computational complexity makes sense if you have a computational problem, in the sense that a computer or your computational power cannot do a brute force calculation.
Yeah.
So, I mean, of course, this is, I don't know if it's empirical or not, but I guess this goes beyond this complexity discussion to say, okay, I cannot use anymore my brute force, approach. So I need to do an approximation algorithm. So do you think that what is the size, in your opinion, of a voting population that cannot be calculated in a brute force way? I guess you see what I mean?
So yeah. So it does not depend much on the number of voters. It mostly depends on the number of
Combinations.
the number of combinations.
Yeah.
So I guess that typically, if you have something like of 10 candidates out of not too many candidates, you will manage to do it by a brute force.
Yeah.
If you want to take
Exactly.
the Parliament of France, for example, with 500 people, it's not possible.
Okay.
It depends. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So now I will come back to the question of which rule we want to use for depending on the objective that we pursue. So I'm sorry, but to illustrate that, I'm going to need another running example for this second part of the talk. So here I have again 100 voters. This first group of 66 voters like all candidates of type A better than all candidates of type B and better than all candidates of types C, and they approve of all candidates of type A. Similarly, the following 33 voters like candidates of type B best, then candidates of type A, then candidates of type C, and they have a slight difference between their preference about B1, B2, and B3. These ones prefer B1 to B2, B2 to B3, this one B2 to B1 to B3, and so on. And the last voter is the only one who prefers all candidates of type C to candidates of type A to candidates of type B. And she approves of candidates of type C. And before we wanted to elect two candidates, and now we want to elect 3 candidates. So the first objective that we talked about was excellence. So intuitively, the idea is to select the best candidates based on some criterion, but the choice of each candidate is more or less independent. You simply want them to be good in some sense. So it's more of an individual notion about each elected candidate rather than a notion of complementarity, for example, between the candidates of the committee. So, if your notion of goodness is the number of approvals, you will typically use best K approval. If your notion of goodness is the border score, you will typically use best K border. If your notion of goodness is to be preferred by a majority of voters to another candidate, then you will typically use the Condorcet rules. But all these rules relate to this notion of excellence. So, for example, with K-best approval, with my example, I had 66 voters who like candidates A something, 33 like candidates B something, and one like the candidates C something. And here it's exactly the example of the taxi drivers at the beginning of the talk. You probably want to elect 3 candidates of type A, and which ones you elect depend on the tie-breaking rule. The idea behind this is to say that any AI is better than a non-A candidate because it is approved by more referees or jurors or opinions of voters. In the case of Condorcet voting rules, you will also elect 3 candidates of type A, namely A1, A2, and A3. And the rationale behind this is that each one of them is better than the other candidates because it's preferred by at least 66 voters to any other candidate. So we can remark that the 2 rules that I mentioned in the previous slides give essentially the same outcome, but some other rules that can be defended as promoting excellence could give a different outcome. For example, if you take K-best plurality, it would elect A1, B1, and B2, and proponents of K-best plurality could argue that it's also a notion of excellence. That happens because excellence, in fact, it's not a formally defined notion. It's just a kind of intuition that you may want to pursue when choosing a multi-winner voting rule. Then we have this possibility of proportionality, which is the second type of objective that we may want to pursue. The intuition behind this is that when you have a group of more numerous voters, it should be represented more by more candidates than a group of less numerous voters. More specifically, if you can partition voters and candidates into several political parties in a way that all voters of a given party prefers all the candidates of their party to all other candidates, then each party should have a number of seats, a number of elected candidates that should be proportional to the number of voters in her party. So this is a very clear and formal definition that say what you need to do in some very particular profiles that can be decomposed into this party structure. So it says what the voting rules should do in those very particular cases, but it does not say what you should do in all the possible profiles, which is more rigorously defined notions than the notion of excellence. And that's why I needed this new example, because this new example has this party structure. I will show the example, the full example. Here, all these people are A voters. So they are of party A, if you want. All these guys are of party B, and all these guys are of party C. I named the candidates according to a relevant partition. Okay, so if I apply this ID to proportional, if I test this ID with proportional approval voting, we will see that proportional approval voting is indeed proportional, hence the name. So here I will use the sequential variant of proportional voting, but in fact, since the profile is very simple, the sequential variants give exactly the same result as an exact computation of proportional approval voting. So here I start with an empty set of winning candidates. And what is the score increase that I will get by adding a candidate? If I add a candidate of type A, I will improve the score by 66, because every voter of type A will increase happiness by 1. Similarly for B and for C. So of course, it's better to add a candidate of type A. And for example, I will take A1. Then what happens if I add a second candidate A? Then the level of happiness of these guys, by definition of proportional approval voting, will increase only by 1/2, because they are already happy once. But if I add a candidate of type B, the level of happiness of this guy will be increased by 1. So in fact, I gain exactly the same number of points if I had a second candidate of type A as is if I add a first candidate of type B. And that's precisely the trick that makes proportional approval voting proportional. So here I can add either candidate A or candidate B, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, now it's not interesting anymore to add a candidate of type A, and I will immediately add a candidate of type B. So, of course, I have 2/3 of candidates A, 1/3 of candidate B, and my result is proportional. It's quite easy to be convinced that if, for example, I take K equal to 6, then I will have 4 candidates of type A and 2 candidates of type B, because adding the 4th candidate of type A will increase the score by 66 divided by 4, whereas adding the second candidate of type B will add the 33 divided by 2 to the score of the committee. Another example of a voting rule that is proportional is single transferable voting. Here I have K is equal to 3. So the quota is 1/4 of the voter. You need to have strictly more than 1/4 of the voter to be elected. So of course, A1 has more than the quota, so A1 is going to be elected. These guys are happy, so I remove 25 voters of this type to take into account the fact that these guys are already satisfied. But I will not remove all of them. I will keep 41 voters of this type. And these guys, they now vote for A2, which is their second best candidate. So A2 now has the quota. And here you already have the intuition of why single transferable voting is proportional. Because you only remove the quota, and you don't remove all the guys that are happy with A1. So even if these guys are very numerous, their opinion will be taken into account into electing A2. And then now nobody has the quota, so I will remove the candidate with least votes. Here it will be all the candidates who have no votes at all. So for example, B4, B5, C2, C3, and so on. I remove them. Then now I have C1, who has only 1 vote. I remove C1 also. Then I will need to remove B3, I guess. So B3 disappears. Now B2 has 11 plus 10 is not enough. So I will remove B1, I guess. Yes, I remove B1. And now B2 has 12 plus 11 plus 10 votes and reaches the quota. So the example of B is also very interesting because it also explains why there is no problem of vote splitting in a single transferable voting. Okay, these guys, they did not manage to agree on a favorite candidate of type B to vote together for. They did not need to coordinate. In fact, by the process of sequential elimination, they are ensured that their voice is heard even if they don't manage to coordinate about promoting the same B candidates. Similarly, you can do the computation. If you choose a quiz equal to 6, you will also have 4 candidates of type A and 2 candidates of type B. And generally speaking, STV meets proportionality. So the last criterion is diversity. And here the intuition is to say that as many voters as possible should be well represented by at least one candidate. But you don't aim at guaranteeing proportionality. Here it's not formally defined notion, but we will see an example. And typically diversity is the argument behind Chamberlain-Courant voting rule. So if I consider approval Chamberlain-Courant, I remind you of the rule. The idea is simply that if there is a candidate that you approve of in the committee, you are happy, your level of happiness is 1. And if there is no candidate that you approve of in the committee, your level of happiness is 0. So if I want to make these guys happy, I just need to put one candidate of type A in the winning committee, and that's it. I cannot improve their happiness more. So then I will put a candidate of type B, and once again, these guys are maximally satisfied. And the only thing that I can do to improve the score is to add a candidate of type C. So the winning committee will be constituted of one candidate of each type of candidate. There are 2 possible explanations behind this process. The first one is to say that once the A voters have one candidate of type A in the outcome, they are as happy as they can be, and it's not possible to make them happier. So you can argue that it's the case in my example with the defibrillators, for example. You don't need to have 2 defibrillators near you. You don't care. Only one is enough to save you in case of heart attack. And the second option, the second possible explanation is to say that maybe they can be happier, but it's more important to represent as many voters as possible, even if that means giving a voice to one candidate, to one voter only in the C group. However, if I may give my personal opinion, I think that diversity is in fact a very extreme point of view that it is very rarely useful in reality. In fact, in the literature, there is a very, very frequent example that is given to justify diversity. It's to say choosing movies for the catalog of a plane, typically for a short plane travel. The idea being that each passenger will watch only one movie. So if you like an action movie, you don't care if there are 50 action movies in the catalog because you will watch only one. So, okay, I am a plane company and I do an opinion poll with the potential travelers, and I have these results. So I have many people who like genre A, a bit less people who like genre B, and so on and so on. So let's imagine now that you want to put 6 movies in your catalogs. If you really apply the idea of diversity, you will in fact put one movie of each genre. You will put 1A, 1B, 1C, 1D, 1E, and 1F. But do you really want to do that? Or maybe you will want, for example, to give at least 2 possible choices to the many people who like the genre A. So diversity is very appealing notion at first sight, But in my opinion, in fact, it gives a very, very big power to arbitrarily small minority. And in most applications, in fact, you at least want something that is between diversity and proportionality. Even if you don't want full proportionality, it's very rare that you want full diversity, I think. So in summary, for excellence, typically you want best K rules, iterated single winner voting rules, or Condorcet rules. For proportionality, typically you want proportional approval voting, STV or Monroe. And for diversity, typically you want Chamberlain-Courant, whether Borda Chamberlain-Courant or approval Chamberlain-Courant, and so on. So in conclusion, I just want you to take out of this talk that multi-winner rules differ on their objective, either excellence, proportionality, or diversity. Maybe I would like you also to remember that there is this large class of rules that is given by the committee scoring rules, where you take a way to assign a score to a candidate, then a way to assign the score to a set of candidates based on the score that you give to each candidate, and so on. And also maybe another point to take back home that some interesting rules are unfortunately computationally hard to compute. And if you want to go further about this topic, there's a very good book chapter in the handbook. I think it's the Handbook of Computational Social Choice or something like that. And it's called Multi-Winner Voting, a New Challenge for Social Choice Theory. Thank you very much. You have questions?
Yeah. Thanks, François. I just have a question. At some point, you said at the beginning, when you wanted to sum all the result for all the voters, you said that there were other choices. I'm not really convinced about
that. Sorry.
No, it's just before. Yeah, this one. But we could choose otherwise. What do you propose to choose, in fact?
Yeah. So that's a very interesting question. In fact, in economy in general, you have basically two extreme points of view that are utilitarianism and egalitarianism. So when you're utilitarist, you will do the sum of the score given by all the voters. Essentially, it means that you consider that the happiness of the group is the sum of the happiness of its individual.
Yeah.
But you can say also that you have a very egalitarian point of view, and you say that the happiness of the group is the minimum of the happiness of its member. That's also a defendable point of view. And in fact, in networks, it's very common. It's max-min fairness. That's the definition of max-min fairness. And in between, you have many other options. For example, you can say, I will use also for this, I will use an order-weighted average. So minimum corresponds to saying that you put a weight 1 to the least voter and a weight of 0 to all the others. The sum utilitarianism means that you put a weight on 1 on everybody. But you can say, for example, okay, we put a weight on of 1 to the guy that is the least happy, then a weight of 0.9 to the second least happy, and so on.
So what you are saying is that you will put this is what I was not thinking about. You will put some weight in this formula, the last formula, but the weight depends only on the score, not on the voter, in fact, on the score. So,
typically,
because I was thinking that we need, but I was maybe more. I would have said egalitarian, but it's not what you are saying. It's contrary, in fact. I would say I would consider that each vote should be considered with the same weight. In fact, it's not each voter should be considered with the same weight. So for me, the only possible is this formula. Maybe I'm wrong, but
yeah, you are. Sorry, but typically.
But I understand now that you can take not the voter but the score of the voter, and then it is something a bit blind.
Exactly. And typically the most simple example is to take the minimum where you
I understand now.
And 0 on the others. But the principle of order weighted average is very interesting because you have a full range of possibilities between the extreme egalitarian version, which is to take the minimum, and the extreme utilitarian version, which is to take the sum.
Is it related somehow with, sorry, François, go.
No, vas-y.
Is there something, is this something in relation with the fact that, for example, for European elections, it is not proportional to the size of the country, but the square root of the size or something like that? Is it something a bit related to that or not?
No, not really.
Not really.
In fact, just to say a few words about that, the number of representants in this kind of a European election is based on models where the opinions of voters in the country are correlated about some topics, about the agricultural policy of Europe, for example, or other economic policy, trade policies, and so on. And you compute the probability that individual voter is pivotal in the indirect election. So you say,
okay,
all elect representants vote on a final queue, and you compute the probability that the voter is pivotal in the indirect election.
Okay.
But taking into account the fact that there are correlations between the people of the same country.
Okay.
François, sur le lien entre ces extrêmes, il y a ces classes de politique là qui avaient été introduites par Valran, Mo et Valran sur les alpha-fair, les utilities, où tu introduis un paramètre alpha et qui vient comme un exposant dans la définition de l'utilité. Et ça donne un continuum entre tout un continuum de modèles entre ce que tu as appelé utilitarisme, qui serait la somme des utilités, et puis le cas extrême qui est celui où tu essaies que le plus faible soit le mieux protégé possible. Il y a tout un continuum. Est-ce que ça peut être envisagé d'introduire ce paramètre de ces politiques alpha-fair et d'avoir un continuum de modèles entre ces extrêmes pour ce problème?
Du coup, juste pour être sûr, le alpha-fair, là, du coup, en gros, l'idée, c'est que la performance finale, c'est par exemple le bonheur du moins content plus alpha fois le bonheur du deuxième moins content.
Non, c'est justement, ça apparaît comme un exposant. Tu sommes, au lieu de sommer ton bonheur, tu sommes tes bonheurs à la puissance alpha, la somme de tous les bonheurs à la puissance alpha. Et alpha égale 1, c'est ce que tu as appelé l'utilitarisme, je crois. Et si tu prends alpha, alors oui, alpha égale l'infini ou un truc comme ça, tu as... attends, non.
Enfin, infini ou zéro, enfin celui qui va bien.
Oui, voilà, c'est ça. Et puis, tu as le cas où tu as des cas limites qui sont intéressants avec le proportional fairness, qui est un cas dégénéré. Et tu as tout un continuum. Et donc, bon, la question que je me posais en écoutant à la fois le début de ton exposé et puis la question posée par Ludovic, c'est de savoir s'il y avait des si on pouvait introduire ce continuum dans cette classe de modèles.
Oui, donc du coup, oui, en fait, c'est le même continuum que celui qui va de la norme 0 à la norme infinie, quoi.
Voilà, c'est ça. Alors, donc, dans les fonctions d'utilité, oui, t'as une forme un peu spéciale, mais oui, c'est ça dans le principe.
Ouais.
Oui, voilà.
Bah, alors, c'est pas, à ma connaissance, c'est pas un truc qui est étudié spécialement dans la communauté multi-winner. Ça rentre complètement dans le formalisme, hein, tu vois, que je donne là sur le slide qui est encore affiché.
Ouais.
Au lieu de prendre la somme, tu prends la somme à la puissance alpha et puis roule ma poule, quoi.
C'est la somme des puissances alpha des scores, oui, c'est ça.
Ouais. La seule difficulté que tu vas avoir, comme d'habitude, ça va être un problème computationnel parce que, en règle générale, tu vas pas être capable de. Comme il va falloir que tu calcules ce score-là pour chaque ensemble de candidats de taille K. Bah, mais sinon, il n'y a pas de problème. Enfin, il n'y a pas de problème.
Et le cas que les gens appellent proportional fair, où tu regardes les logs, la somme des logs des scores, en fait, ça reviendrait à ça. Est-ce que ça c'est quelque chose qui a été étudié et qui a un sens dans ce contexte?
Alors, étudier, là encore, dans le cas des multi-winners, pas à ma connaissance, mais par contre, c'est un truc qui a énormément de sens en général en économie, en théorie des jeux, puisque c'est le Nash product, en fait.
Oui, c'est ça.
Donc oui, c'est un truc. J'ai pas mentionné effectivement la possibilité du produit, mais à part les order weighted average, c'est l'autre truc un peu évident, je dirais, l'autre possibilité évidente que quelqu'un qui fait de la théorie des jeux a envie d'utiliser.
Oui.
À condition quand même, je vais quand même mettre une limite, à condition quand même que dans ta notion de score, le 0 est un sens particulier. Puisque à partir, enfin, par exemple, qu'est-ce que je vais prendre comme exemple? Typiquement, le score de Borda, par exemple, tu pourrais dire que c'est défini à une constante additive près. Et dans ce cas-là, comparer des produits, ça n'a pas tellement de sens, quoi.
D'accord. OK.
Si tu considères que tes grandeurs sont des grandeurs homogènes, au sens où elles sont définies à une constante multiplicative près, bah, à ce moment-là, effectivement, la notion de produit, elle a un sens.
OK. Merci.